I'd love to hear more about your mental health journey as an ultra runner. Just need to have a colonial costume. All these stories are going to relate. It's going to get to the point eventually, so bear with me. Really wanted a colonial costume for obviously events like weddings and all the awards I will get in the future. So we're going to try to do mental health and make it as fun as possible, so buckle up. Here we go. I bought a full colonial costume. I also just got back from a Renaissance fair, and boy, let me tell you, that was something. Man, costumes everywhere. My colonial costume got some looks, a lot of calls of Alexander Hamilton, some George Washington. Didn't really fit the time period, but I really wanted a colonial costume for obviously events like weddings and all the awards I will get in the future. You just need to have a colonial costume, and that's what I wore. Anyways, that was what I did this weekend, and it was fun. There was some fighting, there was jousting, there was wenches, is that what they call it? All kinds of good stuff. Plenty of swords. Wow, it was like, as a 10-year-old, I would have been in heaven. Anyways, today's episode is completely unrelated to the fair. I got a question on the first episode, so this is actually proof that I do read the communication from people. So in the first episode, I asked what you'd like me to talk about, and send anything you'd like, jeff@freeoutside.com. That's a Gmail. No, that's an email address. I don't know why I confused email and Gmail, but the question I got on the first episode was, I'd love to hear more about your mental health journey as an ultra runner. This community is wonderful, but it's also cutthroat, and I'd love to hear how you've navigated the ups and downs. So we're going to try to do mental health and make it as fun as possible. So buckle up. Here we go. So growing up, I was into all sorts of sports. All these stories are going to relate. It's going to get to the point eventually, so bear with me. But growing up, I was into all the sports. That's really what I found was the outlet, what I really enjoyed. And around high school, I was pretty withdrawn, not really good at having friends, didn't really have any. And actually, I got bullied in sophomore year in cross country in high school. And so I quit and decided I didn't like running because the kids that were a year older than me actually bullied me. They full-on pantsed me in the cafeteria. And for those that don't know, that's when you get your pants pulled down to your ankles in front of everyone. So that was pretty embarrassing. I quit and moved on to tennis, still loved sports in general. So I just decided I would move on to a different sport. And this is when I became more withdrawn. I still went to class, got things done, but I was not really engaged, didn't have any friends. I actually asked my dad one day how to make friends. So that's pretty sad. That's when, looking back, hindsight 2020, the first signs of some depression and mental health really show up. From there, I was always raised with the expectation of going to college. My dad's a first-generation college graduate, and my mom comes from, as she would say, a long line of college graduates, mostly Oregon State Beavers. So I actually went to Oregon State. I went for a year and a half. I was not invested. After the first year, I got a really cool internship with the Department of Defense, turned that into a position where I was working about half-time, going to school half-time. In the middle of my sophomore year, I was just uninspired. I was in civil engineering classes, did not like it. I was depressed. The only happiness was just playing pickup basketball at the rec center. I was skipping classes and didn't want to become a civil engineer. I hated the labs. I didn't like learning about concrete. So I quit. And this is a point for quitting. I realized I didn't want to go down that path, so I quit fairly early. Maybe could have known this earlier, but I was like 20 years old. So I quit, and in my mind, I needed a reason to quit. I couldn't just like quit and just work down a path and just end up somewhere in 10 years. So I decided the reason I was going to quit was to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail and find myself. The only reason I even had heard of the Pacific Crest Trail was on a backpacking trip growing up. We would do these once or twice a year where we would hike in 3 or so miles to a lake and camp and fish and crawdad and hang out for a few days. And we were maybe at Pamelia Lake or somewhere around there and ran across some PCT hikers and chatted with them. One's name was Peanut Eater and another two were Wanda and Philippe. And lo and behold, Wanda and Philippe stayed in contact. They're from Switzerland. And they said they would love to stay at our cabin and shower and all that. So the next week we came down, picked them up, took them to the cabin. And I still remember we made like burgers and Philippe ate like 5 burgers and just was throwing globs of mayonnaise on there, just getting in those calories. He had like the heaviest pack too. Dropped them off, continued on their way. Wanda actually stayed with us again in Cascade Locks because she was sick. So that's how I got to know what the PCT was. And it was just like dormant way back there in the back of my mind. But when I was at a dead end and I needed a reason or something to go after in life, I decided that the Pacific Crest Trail was going to bring me purpose. So early May, I put in my notice, and about 2 weeks later, I was on the Pacific Crest Trail. I used my like 70-liter external frame backpack. My total pack weighed 55 pounds. I flew down there with 20 pounds of food. I'd never used trekking poles before. And in fact, I only bought them because I opened up my first credit card and got a $100 REI gift card that I turned around and used on trekking poles. Borrowed most of my parents' stuff, and 20 years old, I started. The first day, it was so hard. My pack was just way too heavy. You can resupply like 70 miles in. So I only would have needed like maybe 7 or 8 pounds of food, and I had 20 to 25 pounds of food. Already a big mistake. I made it 18 miles on the first day, and usually the goal is to make it 20 miles to Lake Morena. I didn't make it there. I camped all alone. My water filter, or my water treatment system, a SteriPen that uses UV light, actually broke at the first water source, and I was camping in my tent, and the sounds of the wind, birds flying by, just every little thing outside I thought was a bear trying to eat me. I was scared, to say the least, but I stuck with it. And within 200 miles, I started making friends. It was so easy to become close to people because you're just hiking together all day, every day. You have the same needs, food, water, shelter, and the same goal of getting to the end of this trail. But it's such a big trail, like 2,650 miles, that you're breaking it down into these manageable chunks. Like, we're going to do 20 miles today. You do 20 miles together. You're chatting the whole time. Sometimes you're alone. Sometimes you're with people. We just developed this really good group. I got a trail name. I was ingratiated into a trail family. I'm 20 years old, and just getting to know people from all walks of life, all areas. It's the most exposure to the greater world I think I'd ever gotten. And it opened up my eyes to see that I love this style of connecting with people. I love pushing my body every day, feeling tired, ready to go to bed, and feeling like all the connection I need is interpersonally and in the moment rather than so driven by online and everything. So I fell in love with this. The people I fell in with were awesome. My pack actually broke at mile 650. The frame snapped because I was carrying so much weight. So at Kennedy Meadows, I hiked 50 miles with a broken pack. Kennedy Meadows, there was this old rucksack thing in the hiker box, hiker box is basically where if you don't need something, you put it there. And if you need something, you look in there and hopefully you can find it. And it's like, take what you need, leave what you don't type of situation. So I grabbed this, and Lil Buddha, who was just on the podcast, he helped me sew up the head belt with dental floss. We cut down the weight I was carrying. They said things like, you don't need 2 pairs of zip-off pants. So they helped me do that. And then Escalator and Hot Cheese said they had a better pack at home they could have mailed out to Mammoth Lakes. And so that's what happened. Hiked through the Sierra with all of them. We learned map and compass skills together because it was a record snow year in 2011. Just became so close to these people and found I really loved this activity. So that's where I found this tool. You always got to have those tools in life where what brings you joy, what brings you back to something. So finish that trail, go back to college, and put in the menial effort to get it done. This is when I realized you don't have to have the dream job or the thing that's going to fulfill you the rest of your life. Some people, they have that. I did not. So I settled on I would do accounting because I could get a job in any industry. I could point towards the industry I wanted eventually and possibly get there. It was going to be the broadest thing I could do and give me the opportunity to hopefully intersect this world again in the future. So I didn't go to a ton of class. I got through by being a good test taker and good at math. I'd already taken high-level calculus and just really had to show up to the tests in like business statistics and tax accounting, and got through that, graduated. And at the end of college, I used my student loans to the rest of my student loans. I'm not sure how they even worked. I had, let's say, $1,000 left over that I used to hike the Pacific Northwest Trail. I thought in my mind, I probably have a month and a half or 2 months that is going to be my time before I have to begin my life. So I went out and had the totally opposite experience on the Pacific Northwest Trail. It was remote, rugged. I went from west to east. So I started on the Olympic Peninsula and was so inspired by walking down the coast. Day 2, I tripped and fell, slammed my head on a rock and got a black eye. So I looked really cool in the photos. And then it poured rain in the Bogachiel rainforest. And it was a really cool trip. It was just like this different side of through hiking, less community driven. I rarely hiked with anyone. I maybe camped with someone, but I didn't really ever have those long days like I did on the Pacific Crest Trail. And it was totally fulfilling in a different way. So this was like another example of finding that way to do it for me and not have that drastic connection or that interpersonal connection, and just be inspired by the nature around me and seeing a bear, making that the high point of the day. So I really enjoyed that, finished that, and then it was time to grow up, put that degree to use, and find a job. I actually got a minor in recreation resource management in college as well, with that hope of being able to work in the outdoor industry someday. Foreshadowing. So I visited a friend from college in Denver, and while I was out there, I went on Craigslist or Indeed or whatever the job site was back then, and I applied, or I emailed all the companies and said, like 5 companies, I emailed them and said, like, I'm going to be here these dates, I'd like to interview. And I think all of them were like, yeah, come on in at this time. I interviewed with them all. By the time I even left Denver, I had 2 job offers, and I took one of them, and it was kind of in that small business consulting realm. So what I would do is be a contract controller for small businesses, or I learned to become that, worked up to it, ran payroll for some, had some clients that were like piercing clients, one that was like diesel, a couple dispensaries where they would pay in like a paper bag full of cash. I would be like 23-year-old driving around with 10 grand in cash in a paper bag and bring it back to the office. Very interesting style, but about a year and a half or 2 years into that, I was very unfulfilled. I was getting very depressed. I felt withdrawn and was filling the void with going out. And I just didn't want to keep doing that the rest of my life. I tried over the summer to make the goal to climb all the Colorado 14ers, and I did that, but it was just not fulfilling. It felt like there were these small adventures that were forced into the empty spots in a life that I didn't love. So what did I do again? I quit. I knew the only tool that I had that worked at this point to get through this long bout of helplessness, depression, loneliness was to immerse myself back into nature. It is not a sustainable thing, but at 25, this is the skill that I had. So I decided I was going to hike the calendar year Triple Crown. I still remember when I told my parents, and it was like, yeah, I saved up enough money and I'm going to sell my car and I'm going to go backpack for 9 months and do 8,000 miles. So I did. I had never really snow camped before, and on week 2 of the Appalachian Trail, I started in February. It was -10 and like snowed 3 feet. Might have even been colder, but I got through it. I pushed forward. It was so hard. I had to manage like overuse injuries, pack weight, post holing for hundreds of miles, especially going through icy Maine. I finished. I flew out to San Diego. My dad met me. My parents were on board and supportive at this point. It was so cool. He like made me huge breakfast. I took like 2 days off, maybe huge breakfast every morning, and then dropped me off at the Pacific Crest Trail and sprinted through that thing, got to the end, took the train actually out to Montana and did the Continental Divide Trail, finished the calendar year Triple Crown. And during that, I made a promise to myself that I would not go back to the career that I had. I got some speaking engagements. I wrote like 60,000 pages of a book initially, and then I just hit a wall. I got a little bit of writing from Digital Trends on the outdoor side, but I just could not make it work. And so I ended up breaking my promise. And the old company had split up at that time, but I went back to work for my old boss. I managed a couple employees, and I thought I could make that life work, or that it was the only option. So I worked for, I don't know, 6 or so months, lived with some friends, and then I moved into my own place, was feeling lonely. I thought that living alone would fix that. It did not. I was, once again, going out too much. I was not inspired by just going out on weekend ski trips. And it just was this draining thing of helping these rich people make more money and just working like 80 hours a week and giving away all this precious time that I'd learned could be used for something so inspiring as being out there and seeing what exists naturally. So after I started getting very depressed. I was withdrawn on the drive home every night. I started thinking about suicide. It weighed on me, and I knew I just had to make a change. I didn't have any other knowledge or thoughts. I had very little knowledge of the mental health options out there, and this was about 2017. I ran a trail race that wasn't fulfilling. I was training for a half marathon. I just couldn't find a way to pull myself out of it by doing things on the weekend. So in true self-preservation fashion, I quit once again, and I decided to hike the Great Western Loop. The Calendar Year Triple Crown always felt like 3 separate through hikes all in a short amount of time, and I wanted to do something more immersive where the Great Western Loop, you hike 7,000 miles in a loop. It's one continuous through hike. So I flew down to Phoenix, Arizona, took a bus to Blythe, California, right on the Arizona-California border. I hiked a cross-country route that I'd drawn up just by looking at water holes for cows, cow ponds, I guess you'd call them, and across Joshua Tree, there was like a 66-mile water carry, and connected to the PCT around Whitewater Preserve, hiked north about 2,400 miles, turned right onto the Pacific Northwest Trail, and then turned right onto the Continental Divide Trail. And this is where I started thinking about, like, I can't do these long hikes forever. I can't through hike and spend 2/3 of my year out living in a tent forever. I needed to challenge myself in other ways. So I scouted Nolan's 14. It's 14 peaks that are over 14,000 feet in about 100 miles. Maybe 2/3 of the trail is off trail, the route is off trail. And I got near Leadville, Colorado, decided I was going to go after it. So I camped near the fish hatchery and experienced my first bouts of hallucination out there, started seeing this safari guide that I'd always had nightmares about from Jumanji. It's a little scary, but I got through it, and I finished the entire challenge in 59 hours and 33 minutes, somewhere around there. And the goal to complete the Ultrarunning challenge was to do it in under 60 hours. So this is when something in my head clicked of like, oh, I can do these adventures in a different way. It's just as immersive. Like, one goal is sitting out there. Life is so simple. You're going after this one thing. All your decisions point towards being successful. And completing that really gave me something to think about the last, couple thousand miles of the trip. And I continued down south to New Mexico around Doc Campbell's, turned onto the Grand Enchantment Trail, took that to around Mammoth, Arizona, where I turned onto the Arizona Trail, took that to the Grand Canyon. And I'd never seen the Grand Canyon before, and instead of just flying through it and finishing the whole thing a couple days earlier, I decided to go down in and camp in the Grand Canyon. The whole point of the through hike, the Great Western Loop, was the most immersive thing that's going to give me perspective, ideas, and a direction to go. Did I find myself out there? Probably not, but I found a lot of directions that I could take things, and one was the decision to slow down for a couple days and actually camp and enjoy the Grand Canyon. It's probably the one natural feature that I've ever seen, and it exceeded expectations. It's got to be so rare. I think most things you show up in, like Mount Rushmore, it's smaller than expected. Hear that a lot too. So I from there, I continue down south, connect that through a route I've drawn up using some old roads and things, and I'm going through the area of Arizona where plenty of hunting, possibly even poaching, guns everywhere, very conservative part. And it was this introduction to this area. I'm not following a trail at this point. Very few people had seen people coming through with a backpack on and just saying they're hiking and camping in the woods. I resupplied at a Dollar General, and they made me leave my backpack outside. It was the least inviting aspect or section of the trip, but it was good to just experience a different, I guess, opinion of what I was doing, kind of have some perspective of like, well, I still enjoy it. It's not going to ruin it for me that guys are wondering where I'm going to camp and telling me that you can't camp on the side of this road for the next 7 miles because it's private. And if you do, they're going to be driving around with their guns. And I mean, you always feel good when they say that, but I just learned that I was going to make it work no matter what. I found a way to enjoy it. There were multiple prescribed burns it was the season of prescribed burns. So there were multiple prescribed burns going on. I had to just make it work and be flexible. And I think that's the biggest skill I carried forward from there. So I complete that, get back to Blythe. And then it's like, what do I do now? So I contacted some friends. I stayed within the thru hiking community. One had a connection and the opportunity to work at Alpine Meadows Ski Resort. I had a book to finish. I had probably 30,000 words left to write in that sucker. So I decided to take the job I wanted as a kid and always wanted to be a lifty. So that's what I did for the winter of 2019. I had taken a drastic pay cut, but I was doing something that was fun with younger people and finished my book. I trained at 7,000 feet altitude that year, and I decided I was going to go after something equally daunting, but much shorter than the previous long thru hikes. I'm still dealing with imposter syndrome, this whole thing of not really fitting in anywhere, but I knew that I couldn't keep doing these immersive thru hikes. I didn't have any money left. So I went after the Arizona Trail record and ended up getting it. I beat the overall time. I did it self-supported so I could resupply along the way, but I had no people supporting me. I broke the overall time, which was a supported time by Michael Versteeg. And that just opened up my eyes that, maybe there is a place, maybe there's a middle ground where you do something just as immersive, but it's over much quicker. After that, I bounced around. A few writing gigs happened. I guess a couple months prior, GQ had written an article. I was able to leverage some of these things into some writing work for like Outside and Backpacker and pitch some ideas. I went after and got the Pinhoti Trail record and then the Long Trail record. And then my parents decided they were going to hike the John Muir Trail because I'm such an influencer. House sat for them. While there, it was like, I do not like the town I grew up in. I have very few friends here. I am alone and I'm lonely. I'm not doing anything except walking the dog like 7 times a day and running. So I decided to move to Costa Rica, move there for 2 months. I'm just bouncing around trying to find my spot in the world here. Just struggling with depression. Didn't know that's what I'm struggling with, but after 2 months, it was good self-realization moment in Costa Rica of I moved to somewhere new and it's the same situation. So now I put myself in something long and immersive, something short and stimulating like an FKT, multiple different cities, and still not finding that continuous fulfillment. And it's time to look inward. So I read probably like 20 self-help books in December. I came back in December of 2019, read all these self-help books, and finally decided I should try out therapy. This is when I thought, well, it can't hurt, but I was so embarrassed I didn't tell anyone. I found a therapist. I was pretty sure I wanted a male therapist, which has since changed, but I went and it was painful. I was embarrassed. It was hard, and I just never connected. It was like my male therapist kept trying to connect with me with everything I was saying, and it was like, I don't really want you to relate to the things I'm saying or that. I just think I just need to be heard. So that very quickly realized that didn't work. And then I decided not to go back and see him. And then shortly after Christmas, I was running and saw a $400 sign on a Ford Explorer, and I bought it on the spot. And I'd been thinking about moving to Montana for a relationship, and so I did. Drove that $400 car out here. COVID hit, and it ruined everything. I'd gotten into the Barkley Marathons that year, and I was attempting on top of that to break the Appalachian Trail FKT, the record on that, and the Pacific Crest Trail record, which is insane to think about, but high hopes. I was still in the mode of, I can fix this depression if I just keep immersing myself in these goals that are just so huge. So COVID hit. About a week before Barkley's canceled. I have to cancel the FKT attempts on the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail. Beyond the politics and everything that was going on at the time, it was just not going to be reliable to resupply. And so everything pretty much crumbled, and I had very little money outside of the support I was going to get for the record attempts, and I ended up working stocking shelves at a grocery store. It was quite a change from where I expected to see myself. Depression hit so hard. One day I called out of work sick and just drove straight into the Montana mountains. And that was probably the closest I was to like doing something drastic. I was depressed, suicidal, and after a couple hours of just sitting on the back of my car, staring up into the clouds, thinking through things, I decided I needed to really do something. So I called a doctor and talked. I got pretty quickly on antidepressants. Within the next month, I found another therapist, tried out a couple, found one that was okay, stuck with her, and then the journey through therapy really began. After a year, I just wasn't making progress. It felt like we'd kind of topped out. So switched to a different therapist and helped me kind of bridge that gap between what I really enjoy, getting to share that with people, letting people in, being more vulnerable, and accepting some of the things about myself that I like the alone time to recharge. That doesn't always have to be in the mountains going after an FKT, but it's okay that I don't have to share everything. There's multiple tools that I have, and it became immersement in trail running, and then eventually some coaching and things like that. So the journey through mental health and all these different avenues has been a very bumpy road, to say the least, and one in which I've had to accept, step back, and realize that a lot of the things that are cutthroat, circling around the experience or the knowledge that people pretend is experience and bestow upon you or talk down, or that imposter syndrome, really, you can look past it if you're confident in what you're going after and the fulfillment that you're getting. It's not about that end goal of a course record, but it's more about that process of having a reason to get out in the mountains, some end goal that's fulfilling, like a 100-mile race on the horizon now can be treated as that end of a through hike. And each day for that through hike, I'm doing a training plan to chip away and get ready to tackle that end goal that happens to be an event rather than arriving at a terminus. I remember right after I set the Long Trail FKT, got a lot of attention, started getting a bit of notoriety, and I just shut down. Me and my friend Luke have this thing where we call it the stages of influencers, where there's like 10 stages, and I think it's spot on. I'll have him on and we'll do a whole podcast, but you move through this thing where you're like striving for something or building or going after something. Then you get some attention, you get some notoriety, and then there's like this moment of anxiety or imposter syndrome. And that hit me so hard, I shut down. I was staying with my friend John in Camarillo, California by LA, and just not doing great mentally. And we decided to backpack the John Muir Trail that year. And so we went out there, and the entire month I was there, I actually did most of the trail twice. While he went to a wedding, he asked if I wanted to go, and it was like, no, I'm going to keep hiking through the Sierra Nevada mountains. So I did that. I didn't get on social media the entire time. I stayed disconnected because I just needed to make sure I was still doing all these things for me, and that it was fulfilling, that I wasn't feeling the pressure to do it for somebody else, to post about how I was out only backpacking because that's my identity, or only training for a record because that's what I do. And it was a really good moment to connect back to that 20-year-old version of me and be like, yep, I still love it. This is still a tool, a part that I want in my life, and I'm not just doing it for the wrong reasons. So I think to tie all that up, my journey through mental health with mental health has been long, hard, bumpy, but also everything came at the right times. Like when I was very depressed and struggling in college, I quit and hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, and I learned this new engaging thing that I really loved, and I made that a part of my life until I could find that next tool. I mean, it was very much paycheck to paycheck or writing gig to writing gig, like barely making ends meet at times. Even on the calendar year Triple Crown near the end, had to go into let's see, what did I do? I had a line of credit, so I took out some of that to get through to the end of it because I needed to finish till I made it work. And then from there, it was like, what's going to be the next tool? And it was FKTs. I could do something that was 2 weeks long, super engaging and stimulating. So I went after that. And then as I learned more, grew older, developed mentally, socially, cognitively, I found that I needed to experiment or at least accept therapy as an option. So I went to that. I still go to therapy every Thursday morning. And then I found, through a doctor out here, found antidepressants, things like that. There are so many tools, and I found them all at the right time. I found community in Montana through the running club here, friends. It's the closest I've ever got to people. But I maybe could have been this way anywhere. I just didn't have those other tools that would allow me to open up, to be vulnerable, to have friendships. So all these tools came at the right time, and that's sort of led me to current day, where it is this balance of, it is so rewarding to coach and help people hit their own goals. Also to have my personal goals, go after them, to start something new like this and create and share, to put things out there that get laughs, because comedy and getting people to laugh is so funny. This may not be the funniest podcast, but hopefully there's some good info here too. So all those tools are now part of my life, and pretty continually. That's what I've worked towards. And I think it's really hard at times when you're in that low, or like I was driving home from work one day in 2017 thinking, oh, I should just stop and get a gun and kill myself because I hate this. I feel like I'm at a dead end. I'm looking at a house, looking at buying a new Toyota Tacoma because that's my dream car. Toyota, if you want to sponsor me, that's all it takes. And just realizing these are not going to make me happy. I have to make a drastic change in being an introvert. And with social anxiety, the hardest thing I had to do was going to be to quit. But I did it because I knew that that was the only option at the time. And in order to move forward, I needed to step back and eliminate those things and then build back up. So that is really my mental health spiel. I hope you have stayed this long. And I think in the future, feel free to reach out with any questions. If you have your own struggles, feel free to reach out, concerns. But I hope this was in some way enlightening to anyone listening. And with that, my friends, I believe we have a podcast. So thanks again. 5-star reviews only. And that's it. Stay elite, my friends.